welcome JC to the team and to Garrick. We're looking forward to you guys presenting. We're going to start off this morning with Corey doing a review of the exercise. I think it was handed out last time. So Corey, I'm going to turn it over to you and take it away.
Thank you, Garrett. Thank you, Clark. Garrett, can you share your screen for me? There we go. So I sent out our exercise. We're going to be doing that again, like we did last spring and summer. We worked on exercises every week. So we're going to start that again. And the start was this one, which went out to all of the shelter leads for each chapter for you to have your chapter leads meetings and go through this. Now, I recognize that last week was a little crazy, but you had it the week before that. So I am hoping that everyone was able to look at the exercise, was able to get together and have a meeting and talk about it. So Garrett, next slide, please. Once again, 7 questions for each scenario that you are trying to solve. What is the problem? Your top priorities. Who do you need to notify about the problem and how do you notify them? How does this affect your workforce? How do you engage members of the team? How does it affect our clients? And what are the future risks and implications? So these 7 questions are the questions that need to be in your mind. It may not, the other ones, the other 2 through 7 may not be in how you solve it, but what you do once you've figured out or where you go for information to solve the problem. All right, go ahead and I don't know who didn't get it, but we'll go from there. Go ahead, Garrett, go to the next slide, please. Here is your scenario. There you go. A wildfire. Wildfire has prompted an evacuation center, which has been operated by DAT responders. The DPM and OEM have determined that the individuals in the evacuation center will not be able to return home this evening and may be out for many days. You have 2 hours to open a non-congregate shelter. How will you assist in the transition? And what information forms do you need to open a non-congregate shelter? I don't know what happened to the email that I sent out to everyone. So you guys obviously are sick of my scenarios and they all went immediately into your spam folders. So let's do this. Here's the scenario. So what I'm going to do is we're going to work this as a team then. So I'm going to call in the leads if they're on for each chapter, and you are welcome to solicit advice from your other team members and see what we come up with. So we're going to talk question number 1, problems being solved. Let's go to NOCO. So is Karen, she's not on, is she? Who's on for NOCO?
I am. This is Amy.
Hi, Amy. All right. Do you want to, I don't know who else is on with you. Do you guys want to work on what is your problem being solved, number 1?
And hi, this is Garrett. So is this, just to confirm, are you looking for what forms we need?
So what's the problem? You have the scenario. What do you have to solve? What is your number 1 priority?
It looks like the number 1 priority is that a lot of people aren't going to be able to return home for several days.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think the other part is we need to,
but that's not your priority.
our priority is to find the non-congregate shelters and find hotels that we can open.
Perfect. Absolutely. So, oh my goodness. So who else in NOCO? Do you have any other, what is it? So, the finding a location for those individuals to go into a shelter is your top priority. What's your second priority?
So the other thing that we have in NOCO is the kits that need to be distributed. So we have kits for congregate and non-congregate shelters that we would take out that have all the forms and, the initial supplies that we need. And then we would also work with our logistics team to make sure that we can organize meals and any other supplies that are needed.
Okay, great. So let's go to WECO. Do we have anyone on from WECO?
Yes, this is Della.
Hi, Della here.
Hello.
So can you answer number 3 and number 4?
Well, we talked about who notified, the DPM and the OEM know, and then we have to go up the chain. And Courtney had mentioned the new team that we have, the TT something, I can't remember.
TRT.
Yeah, that they would be the ones that then would notify, I guess, us and what we're going to do. And then we would just go up the chain and how we needed to go about it.
Okay.
And then go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So how does this affect the workforce? Well, first of all, the people that are under you have to make sure that they're all on the same page and know what's going on. And, something that we took out of this was communication is very, very vital when you're transitioning. It's vital anytime, but when you're transitioning from one group to another group, because you may not have enough people where you're at, so you may have new people coming to the non-congregant, and we have to make sure we're all on the same page so it transitions nicely, and that we know who's going to be going from the evacuation center to the non-congregant.
Perfect. So
Shelter.
how would you notify the workforce that is at the non-congregate shelter about who is coming?
Well, first we would have to verify who's going to be the main person at the non-congregant. Then we would have a list of people after going through all our people at the evacuation center, finding out who had other places to stay, who was not able to go anywhere but to a non-congregant, and have the list of their names and have their forms so that, we can help then give those names to the non-congregate shelter so that when they show up, they can check them off and know that those are the people that are going there.
That's great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So let's go to Mile High. Who do we have in Mile High?
I'm here. It's Bob Springer.
Hi, Bob. Sorry, you guys. I'm working on a computer that doesn't allow me to see everybody, so I apologize. So Mile High, how do you engage team members in this scenario?
Well, notification, I would start calling as well as issue some texts, usually in a group text. Next, when I collect them, I need to figure out what their strong points are, what they've been assigned as a role, have them fill that, and then get working on what they're doing, whether it be setting up the front for screening, processing forms, that sort of thing.
Okay, that's great. So so recognize if this is a TRMT response, which we're assuming it is, so WECO was correct about that. So if you look at your TRMT members, there may be some of your SST members that are there. So you may have to be looking at your secondary, tertiary, or maybe even outside of your chapter for SST members to fill some of those roles.
Right.
Right? Okay.
Right.
How does this transition affect clients? And what do you do to make it, to lessen that effect?
Well, it kind of disrupts their day a little bit, to say the least. I think you have to make more of a calmer atmosphere, not so more well organized. Kind of realize what's going on, and then kind of reassure them things are going to be going more smoothly than they have been. Getting them into a place where they'll be more comfortable, quiet, kind of place to relax that's safe for them. Maybe get them something to eat, whether it be snacks or have water available. Can you hear me okay? I'm getting some feedback.
Whoever is not speaking, can you mute your computer, please? Thank you. Okay, Bob, go ahead.
And I think the next thing to do is we need to, how does it affect the clients? They're going to need to get some information about when they'll be able to go back, or at least an idea of what's being done to transition them back to their homes.
Bob, communication with the clients, very, very important to help them ease their fears. So I'm glad you brought that up. That is exactly right. So one of the things that you do have to do is work on a communication plan, first of all, with your workforce, which Gerda talked about. And then you have to have a communication plan for your clients. Very good, Bob. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
So, Seco, who do we have on?
Jim Boardman.
Hey, Jim. Okay, let's talk
And
about.
Lori and Thea are on too.
Okay, great. So
Okay.
you can all jump in.
It's on too.
Perfect. So future risks and implications of this, first of all, the event and how we handled it. Go ahead. Who wants to start?
Well, one of the future risks could be that the client will not want to leave the non-congregate shelter. They'll get too comfortable.
Right. Okay, and so what are the implications of that for Red Cross and for our clients?
Lack
implication,
of
right?
what was that?
It's a financial implication, and we're not helping them get on their road to recovery if they're sitting in a non-congregate environment.
Correct.
Perfect. So what are some other, besides our clients and their stagnation sometimes that happens, they just have no idea where to go or how to do that. What are some other future risks and implications of handling this correctly or not handling this correctly? Thea, do you have something?
Well, we also need to know, and they're going to want to know how their pets are being accommodated for, whether it's the Humane Society, if the hotels will even allow pets. Of course, Red Cross needs to pay the pet fees, but that's going to be a big issue for people with pets. And I know with the fires, it was livestock, you know, are they going to have their livestock accommodated for as well?
Okay. So what are the implications if that's not handled correctly?
Well, that puts it, it makes Red Cross look like they're only taking care of the one thing and not the whole complete person, which will set DHS into to play as well. But we just need to have the plan ahead so we know what we're going to do for the hotels that we have. Some do, some don't accept pets. Of course, service animals are the exception though, but.
Okay, great. So is there anyone who did not speak that wants to speak to any part of this scenario?
I do.
Okay, and I can't see, you've got to say your name because my computer's not showing me who's talking. So.
It's Ed.
Hi, go ahead.
Well, we got to remember to check to see if they need medications for their blood sugar, blood pressure, heart, you know, if they evacuated without getting their stuff from home. So we'll have to evaluate what needs to be replaced.
Perfect. That's good. That's great. Thanks, Ed.
Along with durable medical equipment.
Yes, exactly.
Great. So we want to get DI and perhaps CEP involved in this. That's perfect. So that's who notified. That's part of that system. Anybody else who wants to talk to this?
This is Sue Mayer.
Hi, Sue.
Hi. So just kind of something we haven't talked about too much, but was brought up on the Mass Care webinar yesterday, is when folks are at a non-congregate shelter to be checking in on them, because they could move out and the room could be sitting empty for days and we're paying for it and don't know that. So they're working on protocols to make sure we're checking that rooms are still being occupied.
Yep, absolutely. Good point, Sue.
And-
That's perfect.
This is KG.
This is Geta. What we tried to do in NOCO during the evacuation, we actually asked clients to check in with us once a day. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't, but I think you should connect with clients at least once a day to find out what's going on.
Perfect. That's perfect.
And to back that up, this is KG. It's important to notify the TRMT DMH lead so that we make sure that we have the kind of support that we need for the situations we're describing that are upsetting to the clients. And I think if it's manageable, it's important for the DMH teams to check in with clients at the non-congregate shelters using the tracking tool just to find out how things are going. An extra support person, not extra, another support person.
Right. KG, that's perfect. I think the hardest part of this, because we have done this, and then I've got some more hands up, but we've done this with the wildfires up in Cameron Peak, and I think we have figured one of the most difficult things is getting that information flow, which was talked about, that information flow from the evacuation center to the shelter and who goes where. So has anyone thought or come up with a solution for that, the actual transition part of this?
This is Geta. So I did staff the Cameron Peak Fire for a while. And I think the easiest way was, toward the end is identifying, let me back up. The situation you dealt with is sometimes we open up additional hotels, other times we shut places down. So during the initial evacuation, it was pretty simple. We had one hotel that everybody stayed at. Once you open up multiple hotels, I think the people at the intake center just need to have the communication with the leads at the particular hotels to identify how many rooms that are open. And then we had, I think, a pretty good communication via spreadsheets at one point. And I think, Thea, that was when you ran the evacuation center, when we had more folks coming in, that we just got a list of people that were coming. Key was to let the hotel know not to have people check in until they check in with the Red Cross staff.
Good. Perfect. All right. So is there any part of this, just the thought process behind this scenario?
And sorry, I did have two questions, one for Garrick, one for Chuck. So in these scenarios, when do you expect to use that tracking spreadsheet? Do you use that tracking spreadsheet, or are we using the Red Cross tool that they came out with toward the end of Cameron Peak? And the second question is around the COVID tracking spreadsheet. When are those being used?
This is Clark. Garrick, I think you'll probably be covering a lot of that in your presentation, so why don't we defer the answer to that question as you complete your presentation, okay?
So is there anyone else that has, Garrick, can you go to the next slide? Is there a next slide?
There is, yeah. Sometimes it takes a little bit to show up. I'm on a slow connection.
You and me both, let me tell you. So what happens is, so the top three takeaways. So I'd like 3 takeaways from, you just throw it out there. KG, is your hand up again, or is it still up?
I thought I put it down, but one takeaway is communication needs to be organized and have a good flow chart.
Great. Another takeaway?
Check in with your clients.
Great.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
We have to learn to make quick decisions on our feet.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, so what we're going to start to do, and so some of you I think were not on our team when we started this last April, I think. So almost a year ago. So what happens is the exercise. So JC and Garrick are going to go through some processes and some new tools now. You're going to get an exercise. So we're going to go through it a little bit. But typically what happens is the exercise goes to the chapter lead. So whoever is the lead in the chapter gets the exercise. They call the meeting and they go through the exercise with everyone. So that exercise, guys, isn't, it's not like you missed the email. So the leads are the only ones that would have gotten this email. So, and hopefully they're bringing the intent is for them to bring their teams together to figure out the solution to the problem, help each other, learn each other's strengths and weaknesses, and then maybe make sure that they're a very strong team when we have to call the SST up. Are there any questions about the exercise, the intent, or anything around this piece of it? Great, so Clark and Diana, and I'll turn it back over to you. Garrick, thank you so much.
Okay, great job, Corey, and thanks for all you guys participating in this. I think we get a lot out of it. I'm going to go ahead and bring on JC Marcia and Garrick Haberstock, who are going to present some of the tracking tool information and SRT and a number of things that I think are really going to be important. So Garrick and JC, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourselves and then take it from there. So JC and Garrick, it's your show.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much. And Garrick, I'll let you kind of direct traffic here. But by way of introduction, I'm JC Marcia. I'm one of your division disaster directors in the Southwest and Rocky Mountain Division. I directly cover Colorado, Wyoming, and Kansas, Oklahoma. But I also got to spend some time in the seventh circle of you-know-where in Louisiana during hurricane season, where we actually developed some of the initial tools that ultimately became the current non-congregate shelter tracking tools. And I've been around the Red Cross for about 15 and some change years. So hopefully we'll get a chance to share with you a few best practices we picked up in Louisiana, as well as from some of my friends that worked on the Western wildfires in Oregon and other areas. Garrick?
Yeah, thanks, JC. So this will definitely be the JC show, which is not a bad thing. We have a great resource presented to us today. I do just want to call out before I introduce myself, Bonnie, you made a great comment in the chat box, really about how do we streamline our phone calls to clients with all of the different touch points that we have. So if we don't answer that specifically over the next hour or so, we'll make sure we come back around to it. But as JC presents, if you can let us know if it's being answered or not, that would be fantastic. So quick introduction, my name is Garrick. I am the new Direct Services Manager for Colorado, Wyoming. I've been in the role just about a month now. Happy to support. And Clark and Diana and Corey really were thinking through how do we continue to build. And so we've got a couple of great series lined up. This on the non-congregate client tracking tool. We'll do a scenario exercise based on that over the next 2 weeks. And then we'll kind of round that out with how do we do our coordination with other functions and why is this non-congregate tracking tool so vital to us. So JC, I'll happily monitor chat and hands raised for you, but back to you.
Okay, super. Thank you so much. So what I'd like to do with everybody today is we're going to do two things. On the one hand, I'm just going to share my screen and take you through a review of our current Excel-based shelter, non-congregate shelter tracking tool. And then we'll also go through some tips from the operations that I've had a chance to be on, as well as some of my fellows in other areas. But first and foremost, so what we will cover today, if I can get myself organized here, is the fact that there are a couple of trackers out there that I just want you all to be aware of by way of information sharing and kind of preparing for the fact that by the time we have another disaster, we may be looking at a different tool, but they should be tracking similar information. So currently, we have two different trackers that can be utilized. One of those is Excel based, and that's what we're going to talk about today because I believe that's what the Colorado-Wyoming region is primarily going to be using as you all engage in operations. The second, and this is one that was based off of the Excel spreadsheet and then sort of morphed into a more web-based platform. And this is what we call the Shelter non-congregate tracking tool in SharePoint. And the big differences there, they capture a lot of the same information, but clearly one is web-based, one is manual in terms of the Excel spreadsheet. And on the SharePoint site as well, there is more of an ability to kind of share between groups simply because it is web-based. But it does take a little bit more tech savvy and effort to be able to populate it because you do have to be able to navigate SharePoint in that specific tool in order to do so. As I said, we'll be focusing on the Excel spreadsheet today, but I did also want to let folks know we had planned on pulling together a sandbox of sorts again, we'll use the Excel sheet so we can do that. But I had hoped to be able to pull together a SharePoint sandbox just to kind of give you guys an example of what that looks like. And I will show it to you, having some pre-populated information available. But as I went to our group at National Headquarters to see if there was a way we could create that sandbox, I just happened to find out that they are actually currently working on sort of a next generation or a next iteration of the non-congregate shelter tracking tool. So again, that's just for your awareness to know that there may be something additional coming down the pike. Hopefully, as we see that come out, we'll have options of which tracker we want to use. But part of the reason that's so important that we use these trackers, obviously for client information, for invoice tracking and things of that nature so that we can actually pay our bills. That's always a good thing to do. But also, as some of you may know, in many cases with states and counties, when we have really large non-congregate shelter operations, we are able to work with states to be able to seek reimbursement of donated dollars when we do have to shelter in the non-congregate setting. So just to make sure that folks are aware, there's a couple of different things that do make this a really critical tool, and that's one of them, because in order to get that reimbursement, we do need to be able to track the information on our clients and have that match up against our hotel invoices and our hotel folios, so that we're then able to submit that for payment and reimbursement. And it's just one more way that we're able to be good stewards of the donated dollar. So before I go any further, are there any kind of questions overall on the purpose or the reason that we have these trackers in place or anything like that? All right, hearing none. I'm going to go ahead and pull up the current tracker that I believe you all have been using and maybe used to. And Garrick, if you'll just give me a visual go, if you can see my screen.
I currently see a dark screen, but that means there's something coming up.
Something's happening. Okay.
There we go.
Jason,
Okay.
I see your screen.
Okay, super. Thank you, guys. So as I said, what we'll do is we're going to kind of go over the tool itself. I'm going to walk you through a couple of different areas where we've learned some tips and tricks. And then we'll go to some of the operations that we saw over the summer and just kind of have a dialogue around some of the best practices there. So what you're looking at now, there is a template for the shelter tracking tool that is available on the Exchange. And it looks very similar to this. We've added a couple of additional fields here. And Garrick, I may ask you to remind me which fields those were when we get to them. But largely, this is a very similar dashboard. And so what you're going to see is you've got multiple spreadsheets or multiple worksheets. And one of those is going to be just a collection of the sites. And when you look at these sites and you're considering, you know, how those things get added in there, etc., it's very important to note that one of the most important things that everybody can remember is that when we're adding new shelter sites, it's going to be critical that if we use this spreadsheet, which it sounds like we will in this region, the non-congregate shelter lodging coordinator is the person who is responsible for adding the additional shelter site locations. So just remember, if you're not the non-congregate lodging coordinator, you'll want to make sure that that individual is engaged in adding those sites so that we can maintain just some fidelity and security around this information. Everyone else that's going to be using the tool, all you'll need to do really is to add and update, you know, client information in the tabs for the various hotels. So this master site list will all be populated by your non-congregate lodging coordinator. And then for the most part, anybody else is going to be working in one of these sort of peach colored tabs down here, which are the individual hotels. So you can see we've got all these hotels here. One of those is the Heartland Wheatland, which is the first tab here. So I just want to take you into this. So if you're working at the Heartland site, this is the spreadsheet that you're primarily going to be working in. And you're going to want to collect as much information on your clients as you possibly can initially, because once they get in the door, as you guys have all probably found if you worked some NCS sites over the summer, once folks get in the door and get checked into their hotel, it becomes a little bit more challenging to be able to get and update that information. So across the top here, you're going to see a couple of different categories in different colors. So we've got occupancy information. Excuse me. We have occupancy information. We have shelter notes. So I'll show you guys here in a second what that's going to do for you, but it just kind of allows you to keep track of other information. You've got the site information itself. So as clients come in, information about their specific site reservation, any accommodations. So this could be access and functional needs. It could be dietary restrictions, as you see here. But you'll want to make sure that you keep track of these for everybody in the family. Any referrals that we've made. And then over here, this is primarily where shelter transition members are going to be working. So we'll know kind of what caseworker they have assigned, etc. And we're going to go back through this in detail in a minute. But I just want to give you the bucket. So you've got your shelter transition information. You have client information. So this is going to be, again, part of that kind of initial data collection that you do. And then again, you have a couple of notes fields here to be able to take some additional notes and some for health services specifically. So we've made these all different colors in hopes that we can help folks kind of navigate a little bit easier and just be able to see, you know, which sections are a little bit different than maybe the one before. So going back to the occupancy information, let me scroll up here. You can see we've got a sample person in here right now. And for everything that we do, it's very similar to DAT intake, right? We're always going to be looking for that head of household. So this is going to be some very basic information here. We do want to try to collect information on the different ages of clients, just like we would in a congregate shelter. And there's a variety of reasons for this as well. Not only do we want to make sure that we're reporting out on that so that we know, hey, we've got lots of kids that are under a certain age. We might need some, diapers, formula. We may need some different toys or playthings, as well as any of our others, adults or those over 65. It's part of service delivery. We have a section for pets here. And this is a little bit more complicated than what it looks like here. We have the drop-down box of yes or no, which is super helpful. But if it's a yes, this is where kind of a best practice that we learned in Louisiana is that not only do you want to know if they have pets, but you want to know how many and what type, even up to including their weight. And that can be put in the notes over here. Why would we want to collect that information? Well, what we did find is if you're operating multiple shelters, or if there's a family that doesn't have transportation, what we may end up doing is helping to coordinate that transportation either from hotel to hotel, if you consolidate, or from hotel to back home, or even understanding, what kind of needs might there be for pet sheltering. So to know that somebody has 4 pets and 3 cats and 1 large dog, large being, let's say, 55 pounds and over, that's important information when we're coordinating transportation, because when we're working with our partners, they're going to need to know that in order to get the right type of transportation and to manage expectations for the clients, right? So I, JC Mercia, have 2 dogs and now 17 goats as of yesterday. Fortunately, I do not travel with my goats, but my dogs are going to come with me everywhere. They're both 55 pounds and over. And Sophie's getting chubbier by the day. That matters because I may not be able to put her in a kennel or carry her on my lap when I'm taking like a public transportation type bus. And so what will end up happening oftentimes is that we have to be able to kennel our pets and then put them in, for lack of a better term, a chase vehicle if we're using public transportation style buses to get people from point A to point B. Oftentimes when we're doing that kind of coordination in larger amounts, let's say we're consolidating hotels and we're moving 10 rooms full of people, that could be up to, 40 to 60 individuals plus their pets. That's why it becomes so important, because that becomes quite the exercise to identify that information and provide it to our transportation partners prior to the day that we're actually moving. That way we come with the right vehicles, we come with the right amount of kennels and the right sizes. We come with the right kind of food and things like that. So kind of a long explanation there, but that's why it becomes so important to collect how many animals, what type, and how much do they weigh, or how big are they, just for that piece. Because what we found is as we were managing that transportation, our partners were asking for information from us up to 3 days in advance, which maybe doesn't sound like a big deal, but when you find out on, 72 hours prior to a move that you're moving and that you have to provide this information, it leads to a scramble. And again, once folks check into their rooms, it gets really hard to keep track of them. And sometimes we're not able to get them to answer phones or answer doors. We just can't find them to get the information. So I want to stop there because that was a fire hose of info in and of itself, and just see if there's any questions around this piece of the occupancy information.
Dale, go for it. I see your hands raised.
Yeah, my question is, when I was in Louisiana, I had several people in one hotel room. However, they weren't going to recover together. So on this form, where or how do I put that information that there's someone in a hotel room, but they're going to need their own caseworker and all that?
Oh, that is such a great question, Della. I'm so glad you asked that, because as you were checking folks in, and we'll see here in a second when we collect site information, you're essentially saying that we've got 2 families or 2 households in one room. So you'll want to identify if they're not going to recover together. If JC Mercia and Garrick Haberstock we've got our families in the same room, you're going to want to put me as a head of household, and then you'll put Garrick as a head of household, and collect all of this information for those individual households.
Okay,
and then,
good.
Yeah, what you can do over here, and again, this is where the note section comes in handy. You can note here that that's the case, right? That this person and this person are both in the same room recovering separately. And then when you come over here to your shelter site information, you'll go ahead and put in, if we're in room 1, 2, 3, you'll put that room number for both families or for both households. And then, put over here what the dates we believe their reservations will be for. Sometimes we start with just the check-in date, but certainly you'll want to make sure that you reflect that information accurately, and then ensure that in the notes section, you make that connection between the two households in one room. Great question.
Thank
You bet. Anything else you see in there, Garrig?
Yeah, Gerda has her hand up as well.
And on the household column, can we have separate columns for last name and first name? That was, that was an issue for us before. I think it is much easier to separate those columns out.
I personally don't see why that would be a problem. Garrig, is there any SOP within CAL that would preclude us from doing so?
Not at the present time, and we can make that change on future editions. Please don't expect that to be in the exercise one that comes out, but we can start to talk about that. Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent.
And then one other primary phone number, a lot of people, at least up where we dealt with, still use their landlines as primary phone numbers. We need to get their cell numbers.
Yes, I'm so glad you said that, because that was exactly going to be my next point, is you want to get a cell phone number. Their primary number for us to reach them is going to be one that they can answer right now. So as you're collecting that information, you may need to make sure that you say it needs to be a cell phone. And Garrig, if we do any updates to this, it might be worth just putting in parentheses cell or something like that.
Got it. Yep. Making notes now.
Yep. Email address is also helpful, although we, as a sheltering team, may not be using the email address very often. Both this and the phone number can become very, very important when it comes to recovery and being able to provide like individual assistance and things of that nature. So if you can get an email, definitely try to do that. The more contact information, the better. Even if it might go to somebody that, if the person says, I don't have an email address, but can I use my mom's, again, that's something that you can put in here. And then over in the notes section, say email address belongs to mother, Kathleen Woodard, that's my mommy. And so just make that note so that there's that information as we go into the recovery phases and even into shelter transition, that we know, okay, this person is not necessarily checking their email, or they may have to contact their mother to retrieve any messages that they're sending us. That's going to be important information. Self-isolation should be pretty self-explanatory. If there are those who are self-isolating as a result of COVID, we want to know yes or no. And then again, in the notes section, maybe they say that there's one person who's self-isolating. Maybe grandma is self-isolating because she's at high risk, but there's no case of COVID or anything like that in the family. That's worth noting. If the whole family is self-isolating, we want to note that as well, because that may mean that we have to do something different with their meal service potentially, knock and drops or something like that. So again, you'll want to note additional information here, because clearly, yes or no, it's like, all right, well, somebody's self-isolating, but it doesn't really tell us the full story. And then this section over here, again, you would think it would be self-explanatory.
Hey,
but
JC.
yes.
Before you continue too far along, there's a couple other hands that were raised amongst the conversations. So we'll go to Sue, then we'll go to Sally.
Hi, this is Sue Mayer, and for reunification, we used this spreadsheet when we were doing virtual reunification. If someone would call in looking for somebody at night, we would every night we would check this list in every location to see if we could find the persons that we were searching for. So that was very helpful, because just, when the things are crazy at the various places, the shelter people there don't have time to be, talking to us and searching for names for us. So it's real helpful for that also.
Absolutely. And then Sally?
Yeah, and I had to get on late, so I may have missed this, but there's no requirement for us to use the National Congregate Shelter Site Tracker. This seems like it's much more in depth than that one, and so we're cool with that. I'm just checking.
At this moment in time, yes. The biggest reason that we want to use this, Sally, other than the obvious client tracking information, is going to be for reimbursement.
And I know you know all the icky details of reimbursement, but at this point in time, as long as we're using this successfully, there is not any issue. However, I did let folks know at the top of the hour when I talked with Casey Richards in our Situation Awareness and Decision Support Unit, otherwise known as SADS. They are working on a new tracking tool. So that, as with many things, might change mid-swing as we get into our heavier disaster season.
Okay. And then did you already talk about if they switch rooms, like tracking that then, or is that coming up?
No, yeah, we're going to get to that in just a second. In fact, we're coming to site information next because we've been talking kind of about the shelter notes.
Thanks.
You betcha.
JC, this is Josh. You mind if I jump in for just a second too?
Oh, I suppose.
Thank you. Hey, I wanted to flag with that new national system, given the experience we had in Cal last summer and just generally the capability of our workforce and how much we're doing on the strike team, we would love to be on the leading edge of testing that new system. And so that might be something where we're involved on the front end just to see if it works, because y'all have really used this tool and used it well and know it works and know what challenges we have. So your feedback is going to help the whole country and whole enterprise. So more to come on that as it materializes.
Fantastic. Yes, absolutely. That's great, Josh. I'm glad to hear you guys might be up for that.
So
Anything else?
There's 2 other hands raised, and then we'll continue along. So we'll go to Gerda and then to Lorraine.
On the so first of all, I think most of the information that you've presented so far should be on the intake sheet. You know, when people are presenting to the intake center. So instead of asking clients twice for that information, it's much easier to just actually take it off the intake sheet when clients come in. The one that I don't recall being on the sheet is anyone anyone isolating. So if that's not on our intake sheets yet, I would highly recommend that we update those forms too, because if they're coming in, if they're in a congregate shelter, we should have that information also.
Absolutely. Yeah. The more we can get sooner, the better. And that way, as they're coming into hotels from like an intake center, we can just validate information. And if we're missing something, we can certainly ask for it. But the more we can reflect, upon intake, some of this basic information, the better. And then Lori, did you have something?
It's Lorraine.
Lorraine, excuse me.
On the phone numbers, because we may have more than one family sheltering together, I think it's really important to have a second phone number contact. And also, if we're in a situation like we were out in Chico, where people were sheltering with us, but they were leaving to go to work, if the worker is working and has to turn their phone off, we have no contact with the rest of the family. So I think a second column for phone numbers is really important.
And to that point, Lorraine, too, if you've got 2 families that are in the same room or 2 households, again, it kind of depends on if they're recovering together or not, but you may also consider, like what we were talking about earlier, saying that we've got 2 families in one room. You know, here's the head of household for family number 1. Here's the head of household for family number 2, and record all of that information. But certainly, again, the more information that you can get, the better. And again, if there's not a possibility of adding a second column for a backup phone number, that's another area where the notes section can come in handy to say, Chris's number is this, and his sister's in the room with him, and her number is this. So that may be another way to get by that. That's a great point.
And Jackie, this is Gata, or JC, this is Gata again. I don't think that's the best way to go, because looking through the notes can be pretty cumbersome. And if we do have those columns, that works just so much better. Looking through the notes section is going to be, especially if you have like 100 people in a non-congregate shelter, it's not feasible to really do.
So Garrick, I'll leave that one to you then.
Noted.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and move into, so we talked about the check-in, check-out status. You do need to come in here and be able to reflect this information. The one thing that I'm also going to add to this is when we talk about evictions, That I don't see reflected in this drop-down menu and can actually be very important. If we do have somebody that's evicted, we need to make a note of that. And we need to talk about, you know, what happened and why and what the resolution was. And I'll go into that when we talk about some of the operational stuff that we got into. But that may be something else, Gary, that we need to look at is how would we record that in a consistent way, and how would we mark it so that we know, you know, somebody was evicted for cause.
So can we just add that as a drop down? You just add another drop down. So when you click on the drop down, it says, you know, had to leave or was told to leave by the hotel. So just add it to the drop downs.
That would be the ideal. And again, Garrick, I don't want to speak on your behalf, but if that's a possibility, that would probably be a good addition.
With Al Ladoff, everything is possible, it seems like. So
of course it is. With Al Ladoff, all things are possible.
It really is just a simple drop down.
So going on to site information, since we've collected all of this occupancy here, site information is again very basic, but can get a little bit complicated because again, you may have multiple families that are in one room that are recovering separately. You know, they're different households, so you'll want to make sure that you make note of that and that you record the room number for all of them. So even if you have 4 lines that says room, you know, 425. You want to make sure that you keep track of that, and you know you'll have to keep track of their check-in date and their checkout date if you know that, you know, as they walk in the door. One of the things that we'll talk about as we get into best practices is really going to affect this entire area because we do want to make sure that what we have in our database is reflected by the hotel in their folios or in their invoices that they'll give to us. We want those things to match up. So on a pretty regular basis, we're going to be having conversations with our hotel staff just to make sure that we're aligned with who's checked in and who's checked out. And that is probably one of the heaviest lifts when it comes to the non-congregate sheltering operation. Are there any questions around site information outside of that?
Yeah, JC, there's been 2 comments that came in around that daily count number and adding households. So one of them is, my guess would be that we would only add check-in, check-out dates for one line to avoid duplicating counting room nights. Mm-hmm. And then Bonnie asked a similar question dealing with the overall room count on a daily basis. Any thoughts?
So what? What's the actual question? I'm sorry, Garrick. I was almost tracking you.
Yep, no worries at all. So when we add 2 households who are sharing the same room,
gotcha.
So we have 2 lines with that. Any recommendations on how to track that wouldn't lead to a duplication of counting rooms? Because if we have the same number twice, it'll show as 2 rooms instead of 1.
Gotcha. So probably the best thing to do there in that instance, you can do one of 2 things. You can add the room number as a comment field here. So if you were to go here and just put in new comment or new note, you can put in the number of the hotel or a hotel room, excuse me. And that way it doesn't show up as a separate room. And also over here, you could do something similar where you kind of put in a note. So if you've got, you know, 2 lines, you might have one that says checked in, and then one that will have, you know, a note that you can add in to say, you know, this person is staying in the same room as Chris Kellerman in room 423. And then over here, go ahead and put in a note that says, you know, this person is staying with Chris Kellerman in room 423. That at this point in time is probably the best way to do that, simply because you will get that duplication if you continue to add, you know, add lines in. Other thoughts on that? I am definitely open to recommendations.
Yeah, JC, I think it makes perfect sense.
I would check with Al on this because I think he has the calculations that are running behind it. Because, you know, putting in notes and I think you're talking about putting in comments in Excel, that may be somewhat of a challenge for a number of people to actually figure out where the comment field is and then just look at it too.
Yeah, and you could have an instance also where one family checks out and the other one does not, so you're still using the room.
Well, and remember, guys, what we're paying for is the room itself, and that's part of what we're trying to track. So again, there's a couple of things that you can do. You can either add this into where it has, maybe we can go in and add a directions page or something like that. Or the other option is that you do a manual count. And that way you're not getting that. You can see up here, this is going to be your sum. It's an automatic thing. So every time you put in a room, it's going to be starting to count those things up. You could also leave these dates open, but to Sally's point, you're going to end up with maybe half the room checks out and the other half doesn't, but we're still paying for that room. So that's why I recommend trying to do something like in the notes field. And then you can put in some check-in, check-out dates here without it counting towards that number of room nights.
Yeah,
So
there's
not,
a note.
not ideal, not perfect, but that's definitely the workaround if you choose to continue to use Excel.
So Virginia has a couple of comments. Virginia, do you want to talk about those?
Sorry, I was double muted because nobody needs to hear my cat's comments. No, it's just a couple of Excel points. Just some questions on if we could use some conditional formatting to flag either duplicate head of household or duplicate room numbers to just know what we're dealing with. And also perhaps a status equal room share. And if we could just have that be in the formula to exclude that from room counts, because what we don't want to do is we don't want to override the formulas and then reuse that sheet later and have formulas that are not in there, because that will bite you.
In the booty, yes, for sure.
Yes.
And you certainly could. And this is a preference thing, right? I get concerned only making things more automated because sometimes that can start to mess with when you're adding and subtracting pages. And also if somebody doesn't use it exactly the way it's supposed to be used, then sometimes you can end up with erroneous data, but it certainly is something that could be done. And it may be able to make things a little bit easier, especially for those who maybe aren't as tech savvy and just want to be able to fill in the blank. Were there any others in the chat, Garrick or Sally?
Yeah, I don't see any, JC. I will say before you continue on, I've got notes on this and I'm sending out thoughts from this conversation. So when we go to the exercise and scenario, you will not have to worry about duplicate rooms. So that's something that going forward we'll get a better understanding of how we'll use it.
Awesome. All right, those are great thoughts. I'm so glad. I really hope you guys get to pilot the new tool. So for accommodations, as we talked about earlier, this is going to be anything that's maybe access and functional needs, dietary related, translation, language related, etc. Anything that we might want to go a little bit differently with. So the one thing that here again that I don't love is that we are limited to selecting one of these things. And in some cases, in fact, probably in many cases, we're going to have more than one person with more than one issue. So, mom might have a dietary restriction and son might have both a physical and mental health concern. And then maybe the infant in the family has something else that, needs to be dealt with there. So we certainly can, again, I would submit either adding another tab, a notes section, something, but and again, this is why the SharePoint can sometimes be helpful because you can mark multiple things for a single family, but you will want to, mark out here if there is something that needs to be, some sort of an accommodation that needs to be made. And you can see here, they've limited it to just dietary, disability, mental health, physical health, and other. So again, probably not the smartest way to do things, but there have been times when we've gone ahead and used the other column and then been able to make some notes, again, back in our notes section to say, multiple accommodations required, one vegetarian dietary, one functional access need, shower room required, whatever. But that is something that we definitely have to be able to get some clarity on and evaluate, especially when it comes to room accommodations. And I'll show some examples here in a bit, but one of the things that we had run into in our hotels is we had a very high population of individuals who stated they had accessibility needs, or some sort of a functional and access need. And so automatically what started happening is they said, okay, we need an accessible room, right? So that's going to be first floor, that's going to be shower bars, that's going to be a roll-in shower, all those kinds of things. There was sort of an automatic assumption here. Well, obviously we very quickly started to run out of accessible rooms with those types of support mechanisms. And so what we ended up doing with Disability Integration and Health Services is asking them to review, each client and determine what their actual needs within the room was. And in some cases, it was very much health services related. They didn't need an accessible room, but they did need a refrigerator to be able to put their medications in. And so we had a lot of rooms that were taken up by individuals who just needed a refrigerator, when in reality we didn't have those many people that needed actual accessibility. It was just that they had those in that room. And so what we ended up doing is working with health services and either purchasing or getting donations of mini fridges to make sure that people had a place to put their emergency medications that may need refrigeration. So that's just one example, but that is why these accommodations are critical to note, and that we need to make sure we are working with all of our friends in, IDC to determine, is there another way that we can make this accommodation that doesn't actually take up a accessible room? There were also instances where we said, oh yeah, we need an accessible room, and again, came with a roll-in shower, etc., when really what somebody needed was a grab bar. And so we had to, there are other things that we can do to make that accommodation in a normal, I shouldn't say normal, excuse me, but in a non-accessible room, just in your standard hotel room. So, again, as those things come across and we're actually moving people from an evacuation point into a hotel, getting a little bit deeper here on what their actual accommodations are is going to be really important. Because if you just put in there, that somebody has disability integration need, right, then we can certainly make that referral and have DI chat with them. But if we're putting folks and we're in that initial mode of getting people into a hotel room, assigning a room, etc., we definitely want to have somebody nearby that can help us with that evaluation, so we can determine if the need truly is an accessible room or if it is an accommodation made into a standard room. So let me stop there because I know that was a mouthful. Anything in the chat there, Garrick, or any hands raised?
Hey, JC, I had to field another call. Sally, could you address Michael's comment in the chat? Is that possible?
Okay, so Michael says, at times I want to hide irrelevant columns so I can see the 2 or 3 columns I am validating in response to a request for data from disaster management. When I hide the columns in my view, are they hidden then for others in the shared version of the spreadsheet? If so, is there a way to maintain my own view of the data without changing how others see it and without creating a copy of the spreadsheet, which defeats the purpose? So I don't know. Virginia sounds like she knows a lot about Excel. Do you know anything about that, Virginia?
I don't know how that would work in a shared environment with a current version of Excel. I could take a look at that if you wish.
Does anybody else have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do, Sally. This is Tom. I totally disagree with that. We had a lot of problems in Texas, and we had a lot of problems in Louisiana doing the same thing, allowing people to manipulate, and it's not a good practice.
So you're saying that if somebody hides the columns in their view, then it's going to hide it for the rest of the people?
That's correct.
Thank you.
That's my understanding too, as well, Sally. And sadly, I'm not a Teams or Excel expert. But yeah, Virginia, if you have any thoughts, I mean, definitely would love to see that ability if possible.
And actually, this is SCADA. The last version of the spreadsheet that we used, Al made it so you did not have the capability to hide the columns or to sort.
Interesting. Okay. Sorting, yeah, especially that would be something that I would think we'd need to do on a regular basis. But so it sounds like that's maybe a note that we need to make, Sally, just to kind of consider for future purposes. IDC referrals made. Oh, I'm sorry. Was there something else?
This is Lorraine. On Cameron Peak, we had several people trying to do their own sorts and their own hiding, and I don't know the total outcome of it, but too many fingers in the pot spoil the stew.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree with Lorraine. This is Michelle. I was on Cameron Peak for casework, and when we were all using the same spreadsheet, I think in the beginning it had an option for read only, but people were going into the other version and they would collapse all of the columns, and then casework would go in to try and make contact and add notes, and our column would have disappeared and we could not expand it back out.
Gotcha. Okay. That's very good to know. So at a minimum, it may be a good idea to maintain that security until we can find another solution, but to not allow things to be collapsed, because it does kind of mess with the view for other people. That's a really great point. Now, IDC referrals made, and weirdly enough, so DI is going into or has gone into mass care, but obviously that doesn't really matter for this purpose. They can still be referred to. We're looking for the date here, and I would update it as additional referrals are made. You know, again, just to kind of keep track of those things. And then from there, we begin to get out of what sheltering is going to use. But I want to skip over here to the client information really quickly, because as you can see, occupancy information was a field, and then client information is a field, and they're very much related. So obviously you have their housing status, you have their address, things like that, that we want to be able to put in here. And then you have all of the other family members' names in an additional notes field. So just because you come to this little light blue area here of shelter transition information, remember there's still this whole bunch in. And depending upon the disaster that you're working and the contract that we have with the state, if we have one, for reimbursement, there is also these two kind of special fields that we're collecting what type of an ID was provided, to verify that they actually live in the damage area. And then if there was a consent to share information provided. And again, that may be on our intake sheet where they check the box that says, yep, you can share my information for the purposes of recovery. And then we would just, you know, hit the drop down box, or they might tell you verbally, or you may get the no. And so we just want to properly reflect that in here, as well as with that information in the ID presented by client. And the interesting thing that I found here too with the drop down box is they very specifically list an unexpired driver's license, and we do have an other field, because as we all know, there may be cases where you know, it's not going to be one of these items, and so we would just have to click other and then make a note of what that other thing may have been. Housing status is basically where did they come from. And so, you know, are they living in their car? Were they pre-disaster, you know, housing impaired? Was it something else? Do they rent or own, etc.? So we just want to make sure that we have this filled out as well. Again, the importance for that is going to really apply to recovery, and what's going to be available for shelter resident transition, for long-term recovery, individual assistance, etc. And then we have our standard stuff of street address and things like that. And you'll notice that it says for street address, no punctuation. So you're not going to want to use, you know, ST period or commas, things like that. You're just going to go ahead and put things in straight across the board. So, you know, if I live at 8000 Main Street, the best thing that you can do is spell it out like that. And that just kind of helps with, you know, again, being able to go back and validate information, especially when it comes to disaster assessment. One of the big problems that we had in validating disaster assessment for people against our shelter tracking tool is that there's a lot of different ways to spell and abbreviate things like boulevard and street, etc. So we could have ST period. We had some people spell out street. We had some people just put ST. So taking out the punctuation really helps with being able to connect or make matches between disaster assessment and addresses here in this sheet. Is there anybody on that has experience in disaster assessment or that worked with that process over the summer?
I have.
So did you find any challenges with that? You know, I don't want to claim to be an expert in all things, but did you guys find any best practices to make sure that the matches were a little bit easier to make?
Really what happened is, I think it was John Miller gave us a list of the legal abbreviations and how they go. I don't know if that sheet's available on the Exchange, but that's what we went by.
Okay, gotcha.
Maybe there ought to be a drop down then of, you know, like, so you have the street and then you just have a drop down that you select street, boulevard, Ave in the correct ways.
In ours, on the abbreviations, when we were doing RC Collect and they were trying to migrate it, if you had street spelled out or boulevard spelled out or avenue spelled out, it would not migrate because they want you to use the post office cheat sheet, and that is available in the Exchange.
Gotcha. Thank you. So yeah, I mean, again, from a best practice perspective, the best thing that can happen is that we determine ahead of time what our address standards are going to be. And to Sally's point, you know, maybe it's adding in a column and saying, okay, if I'm at 123 Main Street, I'm going to put 123 Main, and then maybe there's a column here that can pull out, you know, street, boulevard, avenue, circle, parkway, you know, whatever it is. And that might make those matches a little bit easier. So not sure if that would help, but certainly something for consideration. And then again, as I said, you've got your family member, other names, right? So we want to keep track of everybody else in the family. And then we've got some notes for anybody, and then we've got the DHS notes. And so health services, mental health, etc., maybe making notes over here, just in case, you know, as they follow up on things while people are still in the sheltering environment, we can keep track of that stuff. So going back, I did mention talking about evictions. Hopefully it won't be a huge problem for everybody, but I would definitely recommend if there's a way that we can add in a note for evicted, and then we can put in either here or at the end when that person was evicted and the reason for it. And then I would also say what the disposition of that eviction was. And by that, I mean, did we take them to another hotel? Did they go to their mom's house? Did they go get their own hotel somewhere else? What happened after that? And again, the reason for that is because these things do come back around. And so we want to have that information available to us, you know, if and when that does happen. The other thing that we had done in Louisiana, and I'd be curious to hear if you guys had to do this at all in Colorado, Wyoming, or California, I know some folks had deployed, is we had some conditional formatting that once we selected or we typed in evicted, it would highlight this entire column. And I'm sorry, this entire row. And that way we would know, you know, okay, we see this in red. that means this person was evicted. So as we go to search for somebody, we might do a data sort or find their last name or whatever. And we would see right away, okay, it's red, this person was evicted. Let me go to the notes and find out what happened. So that may be another thing that we take into consideration. Hopefully we don't have a lot of experiences like that in Colorado or Wyoming, but we had quite a few of those, unfortunately, in Louisiana, Oregon, and Washington, and parts of California. So it's something that we had to start doing just because we needed to be able to quickly access that information, and because in some cases the evictions were of a nature that we wanted to ensure this person didn't end up at another hotel, or that we needed to keep them away from certain people. So we had to make sure they didn't go to a certain hotel. And in other cases, individuals may have been taken into the custody of law enforcement. So again, something that is important for us to know, as people may circle back around to come back into the non-congregate setting. And then the final thing, and I'll stop for a bit, is that we do have the dashboard. So if we're putting in all of the data accurately, and we're not mucking up the formulas too badly as we enter information, we'll be able to see by site all of this different information. How many room nights have we paid for? What's the cost to date? All of that kind of stuff. Are they open or closed? And then again, the notes are in here. The notes too are in here so that you can see, like right here, one of the notes is location opened by OEM as independent shelter. So we can put, notes in here that may be important for us to know about the site itself. So this is something that I did not have the pleasure of working with when I was in Louisiana. We had to pull all of this information ourselves and figure it out. And it was really difficult and incredibly time consuming, especially when there were mistakes in the data input. So as with everything else, garbage in, garbage out. And you'll want to validate your information at some level on a fairly regular basis. All right, so that is the tool itself, and some really great comments and input, you guys. Thank you so much. I do want to pause here and see if there's any other questions or comments before I just buzz through a couple of other best practices that we've learned from folks throughout the nation.
Yeah, JC, we've got lots of hands up. So, Sally, I think yours was first up. Was that a lingering one or a new one?
No, it's new. And I don't think this needs to go in here now, but and I know Tom was aware of this, but in the campfire, when we were trying to get those last several people moved out, it was important to know if they were veterans, and if they had FEMA, if they were eligible for FEMA assistance, and there's a couple other things. So I don't think we need this in here now, but just sort of thinking long-term recovery, those are things we might add. Tom, do you want to say anything about that?
Yes, I do, because we're still utilizing that same information in long-term recovery right now in Louisiana. And I can't stress how important that information is, transported back and forth through the spreadsheets. We currently are not using the spreadsheets, but we use the information and put it into our cases. But it's very important to know that, because we get people that are not necessarily affected, but had been in the shelter, relocated, and then come back, and we need to help them. And if they are eligible for FEMA, we send them over there. They are able to get assistance, and especially the vets, because they seem to, everybody thinks that the VA is no good. Well, let me tell you, it's very active in a lot of states, and it's a good asset. So any information like that needs to be captured, especially since we take this information here and enter it into our cases. We cut and paste off of this chart, especially the shelter transition information, households, addresses we utilize in our DA system. So all the information captured is very important. And one of the things I wanted to ask, when I guess I could still, is Garrick, are we using the SRAT tool?
Yeah, hey Tom. The SRAT tool is in the Power app that existed pre-RC Care, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, we are no longer using that because all of our shelter resident transition and recovery processes all feed through RC Care currently. And so we took a Power App that was the shelter resident assessment tool, built it out into the shelter resident transition service that now exists within RC Care that allows us to track some of that FEMA information, eligibility, transitional barriers, etc.
Very good. Yeah, and we can, you know, the spreadsheets that we've been using, we can get in and you can cut and paste, you can edit, you can capture that information in the way that it's set up. So, like I say, we still utilize it, but we don't use it in the form that this is, but this information is still available to us as caseworkers. So
it sounds like that information does not need to be in this tool because you've got ways to do that in RC Care. Is that what you guys just said?
Yes. But
right, cool.
You know, I mean, it's gonna show up here probably in the casework notes somewhere, and we can read that. So I don't know.
That's all I had, Garrett.
Great, thanks, Sally and Tom. So we'll go to Bob and then to Getta, and then KG will round us out for us.
Hi, it's Bob Springer. I may have missed it. I know that the template is going to be, or is in the Exchange. It's on the Exchange. But when it becomes active, say after this past weekend, if we had opened up 2 or 3 non-congregate shelters with the storms, will it be placed in the teams section where we can access it as before when we run the DRO?
Yeah, JC, I'll take that and then you can answer broader if you'd like. So we actually did open up non-congregate for the winter storm, and when standing up an operation or we think we're going that direction, we normally have a Teams channel that houses all that information. And so we can pull this template into a shared location in Teams and then grant access as needed to help keep it up to date.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks, Garrick. I was having trouble with my mute button. I apologize.
It's all good. So Getta and then KG, and I think that'll cover everybody.
So question on the information that is going to be put in through DHS or mental health. What kind of information do you expect to be on the spreadsheet?
So this is going to be very basic level information because, again, you know, most of the casework type information will still be captured in RC Care. But at a minimum, what we would want to see is how things might have been, if we made referrals, for example, you know, how those referrals were addressed, and if there's anything that, you know, we need to take note of for a specific client. For example, you know, perhaps they are moved into a hospital temporarily, or, you know, they've got something that is an allergy or dietary restriction that we need to pay special attention to. Just anything that we'd want to make sure that while the client is in our care, that we're aware of and paying attention to, and that anything that's been referred or sent for referral has been addressed.
But I guess let me rephrase my question. How does HIPAA play into all of this? So this is a spreadsheet that's accessible to a lot of people. What kind of medical or, you know, any information on there should be in there other than just checking we refer to DHS or DMH?
So it would be very similar to any kind of notes that you might put into RC Care, because again, this isn't available to people outside of the Red Cross, right? We're not sharing this information. This is going to be the, you know, client confidentiality. Clearly, we have names, we have addresses, we have very, very sensitive information, and so we're taking the, you know, the proper security precautions to make sure that this isn't just going to fall into the hands of anybody. But again, what we'll want to make sure that we're putting in here doesn't necessarily violate, you know, we don't want it to violate any kind of HIPAA laws. But we do want to make sure that we put things in there that are going to help our shelter workers be able to support that client. So again, if we say this person's going to need a mini fridge to store emergency medications, or we have addressed emergency medication needs and ensure prescriptions are refilled. Those are the kinds of things that we're going to put in here. We're not making diagnosis, we're not sharing, anything like that. But we do want to make sure that we've got information available so that we know how referrals have been addressed and if there's anything that we need to keep in mind as we're caring for our clients.
Great, thanks, JC. And then KG, your hand is still up. I'm not sure if it was an old one or a new one.
It's a new one. Thank you. The IDC referrals made section is very clear, and the delineations are great. When it comes to notes, it's pretty clumsy, and in my experience in all of these DROs, it's been difficult for DMH to know where to put their notes. So I'm wondering if either the notes can be made into columns the same way as referrals, or at least with DHS notes, there can also be /IDC so that we can quickly know where we need to put, for instance, date of contact and name of DMH person who responded.
Garrick, is that a note that you're able to take?
Sure is.
Okay, super.
Thank you.
Great recommendations, and nice to hear from you, KG. Long time no see, friend.
Ditto. Great to hear your voice.
All right, any other questions or hands raised before we buzz through a couple of lessons learned? And I'm very interested, of course, to hear from you all in terms of what you have learned as well, because we're continuing this learning, right? This is an ongoing process. So these are just a few recommendations that came from across the country, and a few reminders. But of course, all of you, I think, have had quite the harrowing summer to be able to share some experiences as well.
This is Sue Edwards with Disaster Mental Health at Mile High. Back to the IDC portion. I don't know that it's clear. 90% of the time I would have a referral from someone and I'd go into this tracker and it wasn't indicated that the referral had been made. So I would put notes in, but I don't know if it's clear. I would assume that if someone makes a referral, they would enter the date they made the referral, and then in notes, we would put in contacted or whatever, which wasn't necessarily the process. So for a tracking sheet, a referral might be made, but you can't go to the sheet to see that it's made. When you go to the sheet, if people aren't putting that in, it's waiting for DMH to say they actually received the referral and did something to it. So maybe there needs to be some clarification as to who is indicating that that referral was being made. It was confusing.
That's great to know, Sue, and you're absolutely right. The intention is that somebody can go in and say, okay, on 3/19/2021, referral made to DMH for this client, for whatever reason. That's what should be happening. So it sounds like, and Gary, you let me know as the direct services manager, kind of what your thoughts are on this, or if you guys have been working on it. But again, kind of just looking at the standard, we would want to make sure that maybe there's an instruction sheet that goes along with this, or that there's something available, some sort of training, what have you, to ensure that people understand that's the process, is that we make that referral and we put the date in that the referral was made so that people understand that.
Yeah,
and
totally
if that's
support
in
that,
there,
Lucy.
then the DMH responder can just in very brief notes over in the notes section, just initial it and say client contacted or something. So it shows that the loop has been closed. And if the referring person, they don't have to put any other information in there, because typically that referral has more information, and we just need on the tracker that it was made. And that helps keep privacy, a lot more confidential stuff out of the tracker.
Good info. Thank you, Sue. And Garrick, I just want to give you an opportunity. Is this something that you guys have already been working on?
We've definitely started some conversations, right, about what does referral made actually mean. And the conversation isn't aligned with, like, we put in a date and then we reach out to IDC to ask them to follow up so that they know to follow up, as
Gotcha.
opposed to relying on them to look at the tool, right? So we're all learning, we're all perfecting this as we continue to use it. So,
Gotcha.
JC, I just want to call out one other thing. There were some comments in the chat box about Excel versus SharePoint versus etc. So after you run through these tips and tricks from other best practices, could you just remind everybody about kind of where we're at with these tools going forward?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yes, we'll go ahead and buzz through these, and I'm not going to read these exhaustively. I'll send this to you guys, just so that you have it if you're at all interested. But again, some lessons learned that I've collected from across the nation, as it pertains first to client information and registration. So kind of that first contact. We really do need to get 100% registration of every single room during that initial check-in. It sounds to me like Colorado, Wyoming had a pretty darn good process over the summer, and so I think there's some best practices to share out. But we were finding in some cases that was not happening. People were getting assigned to a room and we didn't have complete information. And I think we already looked at this too around the size and type of the pet, things like that. One thing I didn't see in the tool was transportation and tracking whether or not clients have transportation, their own transportation. So asking them, do you have a vehicle that you can use for transportation versus, are you using public transportation, et cetera, is also critical information that we may want to, add in here. And that's for a variety of reasons. And of course, that eviction information. The other thing is, and I don't know if this happened to you guys at all, so enlighten me, but we did a lot of taking over from partners. So in Louisiana specifically, and this happened a little bit in Oregon and Washington, but in Louisiana specifically, the way they roll there is that the Department of Child and Family Services will first open the shelters, and then Red Cross will come in and assume the management of them from that partner. And what we found was the information that we got on clients was woefully incomplete. In a lot of cases, it was somebody scanned a driver's license or other kind of an ID using DCFS equipment. They were able to scan those kinds of things like the police do when they pull you over. I know from experience. And so we would end up with, John Smith at this address, which may or may not be his current address anymore, and family of 5. That's what we had. And so we had to go back through, literally thousands and thousands and thousands of people to be able to complete the information. So if you're taking over from a partner, validate what information they have collected before you get into that situation. And then what we ended up having to do was lock out rooms, because that was the only way that we could get people to come see us to actually register. It sounds a little draconian probably, but honestly, when we did it like a floor at a time in each hotel. So it wasn't, 20,000 people were locked out of the rooms all at once. But we had to do a phased approach, and it took us weeks to get even, to 70% data fidelity. Hotel information and relationships, and this isn't part of the tool necessarily, but again, something to definitely consider is to have a designated point of contact for that hotel. And we're talking about the folks that are there day and night desk, because again, we have to be able to work with them to do room lockouts, to find out what's going on with clients, to resolve issues, sometimes to even go in and, have them open rooms for clients if we haven't heard from a client in a while and we need to do a welfare check, to go through our data together and be like, hey, I'm still showing this person is checked in. Are you? So having somebody who can have that relationship is really important, and keeps the hotels a little happier too. It cuts down on confusion, things like that, and really just improves the partnership with that hotel overall. Because of course, we want to be able to leave a good impression. Let's see. I talked about this earlier, assign the proper room to the client's needs. Again, just because somebody has indicated that they've got an access or functional need doesn't necessarily mean that they need a function or an access room. So just, making sure that we've got folks on hand as we're checking people in and assigning hotel rooms that can help us evaluate what the actual needs are. And if there's something else that we can do to keep that client in a room that might be, again, with a refrigerator or with an extra bed or, something like that. But we don't want to take up accessible rooms if we don't have to, because they are so few and far between. And we may have people with genuine needs that we must be able to put them in those rooms. Consolidation, we did quite a bit of this. So we went from, especially in New Orleans and in Oregon and places like that, we had a lot of hotel rooms going. I think at one point in New Orleans, we had something like 43 hotels, 43 different sites. And we ultimately consolidated over a couple of months down to like 3 sites before I left there. And what we found there, if you are going to do consolidations, allow at least 3 days for transition, and try to move in room blocks. So either by room, by last name, by floor, by something like that. And find a way to provide something that will validate this person is coming from hotel A to hotel B and they should be allowed in. What we ended up doing was having them, fill out some sort of a registration form so that we could collect additional information, because we had terrible data for a long time. And so that was our way of basically ensuring that they were able to go to a new hotel, so that nobody just showed up and was like, oh yeah, I came from the embassy, right? We did have some of that happen. So fortunately, because we had those quote unquote tickets, paper copy with like a signature of a Red Cross person on it, that made things a lot cleaner and allowed us to update our data as well. We talked about damage assessment. So we want to make sure that we agree on a naming convention when it comes to streets. Streets, boulevards, avenues, parkways, etc. However you guys decide you are going to manage that, decide it early on, because it makes it a lot easier to connect what DA is collecting versus what we're showing as pre-disaster addresses in our tracker. And we also want to have the DA team do an analysis of those hotel records, just to be able to determine the damage classification of every single household. And DA really has to be involved in that process, because they, that's their expertise. And if we don't have an understanding of damage, then it delays shelter resident transition, it delays casework, it delays long-term recovery, and it creates a lot of kind of circular issues, especially if you're moving people into an area on public transportation, because what we were having happen is that they would take public transportation back to their home of record, because we were saying, oh yeah, there's no damage, we can't find a match. And then they would get there and it turns out actually their home was destroyed. And so they would have to cycle back into the shelter system. So just a really terrible experience for our clients as well. So that was the couple of things that I had on just operational best practices, and want to open it back up to any questions or other discussion. Sally, yes, ma'am.
So there was a question way back in the chat from Sue Mayer, who was asking about why the other household members would be way over to the right and not right next to the primary client.
That's a really good question. My personal preference would be that they would move over the occupancy and the client information into a single area. I don't know, Garrick, if you've heard anything about why it was moved all the way over like that, but in the original iteration of this tool, the occupancy information and the client information were closer to one another. So it was just easier for us to look at all of that information in one place. But I don't know why that decision was made.
Yeah, I've got it noted, JC. And
Okay,
Sally.
cool.
And Sue.
And I think it would be easy enough to move it if we wanted to. But I think another reason for that is really for the purposes that we have, 9 times out of 10, the stuff that we need to be able to see right away is who's the head of household, how many people do they have with them, and what room are they in. And so that we kind of condensed all of that together. But it makes a lot of sense to me to move that information if that's a decision we decide to make as an organization.
Thanks. And I see there's a lot of information about the details of this spreadsheet in Excel, and Bob Lynn is also an expert. And so I would recommend that Garrick and Al incorporate some of these people that have a lot of expertise. That's all I have.
And I see a note in here from Lorraine. We found that due to multiple evacuations, people would show up at the hotel they previously occupied and told the front desk that they were with the Red Cross and had not actually spoken to Red Cross ahead of their new arrival. I love that you pointed that out, Lorraine. Thank you. That is part of the reason that we want that relationship with the hotel front desk. We had a lot of folks that would just kind of randomly show up and be like, hey, I got evacuated. I need a hotel room. I'm with the Red Cross, even if they'd never been there before. And so what we ended up doing with the hotels is we made friends with the front desk staff, and we're like, hey, if somebody comes to tell you that they're with the Red Cross, send them to, if they don't have this registration form, send them to us and we'll get them hooked up. But that just, again, made sure that if we weren't closely located to the hotel front desk, we were able to kind of manage that flow. And so again, that registration form or, having something that they can provide, even I think one hotel decided they would provide them with like a Red Cross card of some sort that would have like the date and some other indicator on it. But they just made a deal with the front desk to say, hey, if this person doesn't have this piece of information or what have you, then they don't need to be checking in.
Cool, JC. I don't see many hands, but I'll call out some of the things in the chat box about grouping family information and demographic information all together, and then reorganizing the IDC follow-up and referrals. So know that all that's in an email I'm tracking on.
Fantastic.
I see a couple more hands up.
That's funny. That's hilarious. It's not, it shouldn't be funny, but it just like at this point, what can you do but laugh? They wanted the hot breakfast versus the continental. That's hilarious. Oh boy.
Does Sue Edwards have a hand up?
I don't see any hands, but
I've got a hand next to her icon.
I did, and I hung mine up.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'm not showing it. That's funny.
And then KG, there's one next to her icon on my computer, but I don't see it up above.
Yeah, I don't have my hand up. This is
Yeah,
Kate.
it went down as soon as you clicked. Yeah, interesting. My computer's weird.
Hyper.
Yeah, I don't. This is Clark, so I don't see any more hands up. Garrick, do you have any more to add to this?
Clark, the only thing that I have to add is helping set up some of the scenario things, but we can do that whenever.
The scenarios for the coming exercise over the next 2 weeks, is that what you're referring to?
That is correct.
All right. Well,
Garrick, are
seeing
you
no
there?
other hands or comments, then I am done for the day. And I hope this was helpful.
Yeah, very. Thank you, JC.
Yeah, thanks, JC. Clark, there's a horrible echo coming, but yes, to your previous question to me, yes.
Yeah, is it still there?
I think we're good now. Yeah, I no longer hear it. I'll keep rambling to make sure. Clark, can you hear us?
Can anybody hear me at all?
Yeah, we can hear you, Clark.
Yes.
I'm gonna go out.
Yeah, we can hear Clark, but I don't think Clark can hear us. So.
Yeah, okay, I'd switch to a different computer. Can you hear me now?
Loud and clear.
Okay, fine. Did you, we'll do the scenarios here. Corey, are you ready to introduce the scenarios, or are we going to just?
Actually, I'm going to have Gehrig came up with some very humorous pieces to our next scenario. So recognize it's very important for each of the chapter leads for the strike team to meet with your teams, because the exercise this week will feed directly into what we're going to be discussing next week, and then feeding directly into the exercise in 2 weeks and into that. So it's very important. This is not something that we can do on the fly in the meeting in 2 weeks. So please do get together, and then Gehrig, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thanks for that setup, Corey. And I'll take the moment. JC, thank you so much for spending an hour and a half with us today. As you're filling in as the interim DDE and making time for us, we greatly, greatly appreciate it. So I just want to make sure that's said.
Yeah, Derek, I would also, this is Clark. JC, we're so much appreciative. This is such good information. You've given us a lot of work to go back and work through. So we'll be revisiting this before the end of our scheduled educational period, which will end in the middle of May. So this is a great topic, and I just want from myself and the whole team, thank you a great deal. So appreciate it. Gary,
My
go
pleasure.
ahead.
Great, thanks everybody. So we're just going to set up the scenario real quick. So the reason we're doing this a touch different is we're asking for a lot of feedback, and it might be a bit more involved. And actually through this, we want you all to help us establish what our best process is, our best practice is going to be for the region. So the scenario will follow very similar format where we'll have those common 7 questions on problem solve, top priorities, who do we need to inform, how do we engage each team member, etc. And what we're looking at is we're going to just build upon that last one we had. So we have some families that were at an evacuation center, and we've been determined that they need to be transitioned to a non-congregate lodging situation. And we need to have that done in the next couple of hours, and there's 26 families. And so to start with, right, we're asking the questions about how did you determine who needs to be lodged overnight? We recognize in the scenario we're giving you that it has to happen, but how would you make that decision in your evacuation center of who needs overnight lodging accommodations? And then what is the process that's going to be used to transition from that evacuation center to a non-congregate site as it relates to registration? How's it going to happen? When's it going to happen? Where is it going to happen? And then as that's built out, like what supplies do you need to make that happen to be successful? And we recognize that like there's probably lots of thoughts out there, but hopefully through this conversation with 4 teams working on it, we can pull the best practices and the best pieces so that as a follow-up from this exercise, one of the things we'll do is set that standard for the region of when we have to do this in the summer for a wildfire. This is what we've seen as a best practice and encourage everybody to follow that. So that's kind of the first step. And then from there, what we want you to do is actually use the non-congregate client tracking tool to input hotel information and family information. It's really about getting familiar with using the tool, clicking the buttons, clicking around in it. And so we're providing that hotel information and the family information. And if you take a quick glance at the names, that's why Corey chuckled at these so much, as there might be some famous people that are showing up in your hotel, which might drive some media attention, but hopefully you get at least a little bit of a chuckle through that. So that's the scenario for the week. Of course, we'll want the normal takeaways. And so you'll receive that via email from Corey. You'll also receive this spreadsheet. I recognize it might be a little hard to see. I'll make it a little bit bigger, and you can actually use your focus or full screen to make it even bigger. But Al was gracious enough to set this up for us. So we've already, as mentioned, when JC mentioned at the very, very beginning that the non-congregate shelter lodging coordinator would put in your hotels. So you're going to receive a tool that already has that completed, right? We've got our names here and our hotel names across the bottom. So you won't need to do any of that. You'll just need to input the information for the hotel, the rates, etc., and then you'll get to input client information and really get to make the best determination about which hotel is best for the individuals based on the information you're being provided through this scenario. So we hope that this helps get the orientation to the tool, get familiar with it, and just understand there's a little nuance things or what happens when I click this field. That's one part of the goal. The other one is really helping us establish that best practice on how we transition from evac center into that non-congregate shelter situation. So I'll pause. That was a lot of information. Any thoughts or questions out there from anyone on the scenario and kind of where we're going for the next 2 weeks? Great. I don't hear anything, so I'll assume that it was explained well, and there'll be more information coming via the email from Corey. So I'll turn it back over to Corey, Diana, and Clark to wrap us up for the day.
Very good. Thank you so much, Garrick, and again, JC. This has been super great session. Corey, do you have anything to add? Take that as a no. Diana, do you have anything?
No, thank you, everybody. Great session.
Yeah, just watch for your email. If you have any questions, you can get a hold of either Clark, Diana, myself. Garrick's kind of a busy guy right now, but we'll filter anything we need back to him. But go ahead and ask the three of us and we'll see what we can do for you.
Okay, great. Our next session is on the 2nd of April. So that's 2 weeks from now, and we'll dial into the scenario and we'll be sending out another agenda for our next topics of development and understanding as we continue to expand the implication of the shelter strike team process. So you guys are really super for being part of this, and it's really paying off as it did in 5, 6, 7. And in our recent situation we had here with the snow. And so it's really, really good. So I appreciate your time, and please reach out to myself or Diana or Corey if you have comments or want to have any discussions about anything that relates to the shelter strike team and its process. So with that all said, I see no hands up or anything in the chat. So it is about 8 minutes to noon, so you get a little bit of extra time. And thank you so much for being part of the team.